an extraordinary day in terms of macro policy. And I'm interested if you can put that onto the micro of whether or not technology and the AI hype is still something to buy into at these points.
Absolutely. So, I think yesterday felt like Santa Claus came to town a little bit, right? The markets like the outlook for next year. We're finally done with rate hikes. I think, we'll have some restrictive policy, but at least no more kind of like pounding on the gas to hike rates and, kind of break the economy. So I think that sets tech up very well. And I do think that the next 5 to 10 years of technology are going to be supercomputing, quantum computing, and AI. And we've talked so much this year about NVIDIA. You and I have talked so much about NVIDIA and AMD this year. And I think they're kind of the clear leaders in chips. But what I think will happen next year is now all of the floodgates will open. So Intel's going to come in, companies like IonQ, like IBM, and, the bigger components around AI, like data processing, supercomputing, 5G for the speed to make AI work, will all become tradable themes. And you're going to start getting, beyond the Magnificent Seven for AI plays.
What's interesting, though, is how much the exuberance becomes real revenue. Now, NVIDIA has managed to prove that point to some extent, but I think of Adobe, we're going to dig into that story later in the show, but ultimately its earnings not living up to the hype in terms of how quickly it can turn it into revenue, into the bottom line. How much can an IBM, how much can quantum computing finally become the sort of revenue driver?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I think what happened a little bit with AI is that AI has been around for such a long time. And there was a news flash around Microsoft this year, and then AI became kind of the word of the year. But then it started to feel like a bubble, and people started to equate it to, meme stock mania and, kind of that world that happened. And then it was kind of like thrown to the side a little bit, but now it's back because, to your point, they're starting to show revenues. So I do think that everyone who sort of hitched the word AI onto their wagon is now going to have to prove it in, Q1, Q2, probably actually Q4 as well, earnings. So I do think that you're going to start seeing that play out. And it is super important for companies like IBM. So IBM is a company that has a formed, quantum computer, and they're actually working with companies like Cleveland Clinic to have better outcomes in drug trials and things like this. So quantum computing is now actually becoming more of a reality, and it exists. Granted, you need a whole room the size of this and a lot of air conditioners to run it for a process now, but it's there, right? So 5 to 10 years from now, sky's the limit.
Taking a look at the Defiance Quantum ETF, ticker QTUM, with which, of course, you are familiar. It's yours. And all of the names you've just mentioned are in there. What I find so interesting is how long does this keep going, right? You look at the performance year to date, up almost 40%. You have Lisa Su of AMD saying that the market she saw as being $150 billion just in August is actually going to be $400 billion in 2027. How do you keep this going? It's been ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think what's interesting about, this ETF and, some of the names I mentioned is IBM, IonQ, Arabella. Some of the smaller types of companies in this index are not companies that we're talking about right now. We're talking about Microsoft, we're talking about Google, NVIDIA, AMD, maybe a little bit of other names in there. But what's going to happen is that you have a whole lot of small cap names in there. So, why aren't we up 200%? Well, you're getting the performance of the large caps, but the small caps, because of rates and, kind of new to the scene types of conditions, are going to probably start to rally and pick up performance. So I do think that this is going to ride out as those smaller companies start to generate revenues, and then are kind of cushioned by the Google and the Microsoft that might end up returning 5 to 10% next year, and not triple digit for NVIDIA's and things like that. So I think having that well-balanced mix of names you're not thinking about gives it room to run.
Sylvia, in the context of yesterday's Fed meeting, the eco data we've had of late, how isolated is what's happening in the AI industry, for want of a better descriptor, from what's actually happening in the global economy?
Yeah, so I think that the AI industry is kind of almost being pigeonholed again into some of the Magnificent Seven and a couple of specific themes that are very sort of just like straight technology-focused AI, data processing, things like that. But we don't really talk about, the macro impact and how, that will play into what's going on. So, first, the government is going to increase AI spending by, billions of dollars next year. So there's going to be sort of money going into AI, supercomputing, artificial intelligence. The growth of AI is creating this need for cloud and cybersecurity. So that's going to increase in, kind of macro business spending and things like this. And then I think just overall, you're finally going to start talking about about how AI impacts different sectors. Healthcare, for example. Are we getting those better kind of like drug outcomes, surgical procedure outcomes, things like this? So I think the story is going to change more about how is AI making companies more efficient, and that started a little bit with digitalization of factories for missing workers, but I think that'll really continue to play out.
I'm interested in, well, Ed says maybe the rally's been ridiculous when it comes to AI. Some might have said that crypto's starting to look a bit ridiculous again, but it's managed to top out about shy of 45,000. There has been a roar in 2023. Will that continue? Is that all about macro? Is there anything idiosyncratic that you like there?
Yeah, so I think that there's a little more room to run in crypto, and that's because I suspect, I can't predict the future, but I suspect that these approvals that we've kind of long awaited for are probably going to play out. And then, so you're just going to have kind of a shift of assets in some regard, and new products are going to have to buy more Bitcoin to create themselves. So you'll really have that demand need. But then once that comes out, now all of a sudden these products become more institutionalized. They're easier to trade. You get better spreads. You don't have to worry about kind of futures rolling contango or managing digital wallets. And then I think the efficiency of all that starts to play out more. So, do I think it's going to double or triple? I don't know, but I do think that there's some solid runway left, particularly around that. Once we get that stamp, like this is approved, I think Bitcoin's going to run.